The biting wind howled through the desolate mountain pass, carrying with it a freeze that seemed to penetrate the very bones of anyone foolish enough to brave the wilderness. Inside the makeshift shelter, two figures huddled close to a small, flickering fire that offered more smoke than actual warmth. One of them, a man with a weathered face and eyes clouded by exhaustion, looked out into the swirling white void. He turned to his young companion, his voice a tight whisper against the roar of the blizzard. He told the boy that he did not know if they were going to make it out of this situation alive, noting that they'd been entirely out of food for 3 days now. The temperature, he guessed, must be 50 below zero. A low, mournful sound echoed from the darkness outside, sending a shiver down their spines. The man muttered about the wolves, stating that he could almost feel their sharp eyes watching them through the storm, just waiting for the perfect chance to get them. He looked down at the large dog resting at their feet, its ears alert and tail tucked. He sighed, telling the boy that they had only got one chance left, and they were going to have to fight their way out of this together. Suddenly, the harsh winter wilderness vanished, dissolving into the familiar, warm surroundings of a suburban living room. The television screen glowed brightly, showing the credits of the classic adventure movie. A mother walked into the room, her footsteps soft on the carpet. She called out to her son, Colin, telling him that it was time to go and that he needed to get ready. The young boy, still entranced by the black and white screen, replied that he would be right there. His mother reminded him that he knew exactly what to do, because they were on a tight schedule. Colin reluctantly stood up and patted the large German shepherd sitting faithfully beside him. He told the dog to get down, calling him a good boy. His mother looked at the dog and then at her son, a gentle smile on her face, guessing that Colin had probably put the dog up to that little display of affection just to delay their departure. Colin looked up at his mother with pleading eyes, asking if they could please take the dog with them this time. His mother shook her head gently but firmly, stating that she had already said no. When Colin pressed her, asking why they could not bring his furry best friend along, she explained that it was because his father had said so. Colin looked away, a shadow of resentment crossing his youthful face as he muttered that the man was not his true father. He turned back to the dog, calling him Buck, and told him to stay behind and be a good boy. He comforted the loyal animal, whispering that he knew it had to be this way, even if it felt like his stepfather was the one making it difficult. He promised Buck that he would see him later. Later that evening, the house grew quiet. On the kitchen counter, a brief note left by the mother read that she would be home late and requested Mary to please feed the dog. Joseph Beecher, a stern and busy man, walked into the house after a long day at his law firm. He glanced at the note, muttering to himself that the brief message just about summed up his entire domestic life. He looked toward the corner where the German shepherd stood, watching him with an unreadable expression. Joseph picked up a dish of dog food, calling Buck a stupid mutt, and walked out toward the backyard. He placed the dish on the ground, asking the dog if he was going to eat it or just stare. He remarked that he loved the dog too, sarcasm dripping from his voice, before telling the animal that the food was there if he wanted it. Just as he turned to walk back inside, a strange, rustling sound came from the shadows near the fence. Joseph froze, asking aloud if anyone heard something, before stepping further into the darkness of the yard. The next morning, a distinguished gentleman with graying hair and an air of calm confidence walked up the porch of the beautiful estate. He knocked on the door, and it was opened by a sharp-eyed woman. The gentleman introduced himself as Barnaby Jones, inquiring if she happened to be Mrs. Beecher. The woman shook her head, explaining that she was afraid Laura was not there at the moment. She asked if Mr. Jones had an appointment with her. Barnaby nodded, explaining that his secretary had called the previous day and that he might be a little early for their meeting. The woman smiled politely, assuring him that if Laura had made an appointment, she would certainly be there soon. She invited him to come inside and wait in the sitting room. Barnaby thanked her graciously, stepping into the elegantly decorated house. As he settled into a chair, the woman introduced herself, explaining that she had been a law partner of the late Mr. Beecher and had stopped by to pick up some important papers he was working on at the time of his tragic passing. Barnaby looked at her intently, guessing that her name must be Claudia Elwood. The woman looked surprised, asking how he could possibly know that. Barnaby revealed that he represented the California Meridian Insurance Company. He explained that Mr. Beecher carried a couple of rather large life insurance policies, one of which named her law firm as a beneficiary. He added that he had an appointment to meet with her senior partner, Mr. Carson, later that afternoon. Claudia realized the true nature of his visit, noting that he must be an investigator. Barnaby confirmed this, stating that because of the immense size of the insurance policies, his company believed it was necessary to make a few standard inquiries into the nature of Mr. Beecher's fatal accident. Claudia suggested that he would probably like to see the exact location where the tragedy occurred. Barnaby expressed interest, but politely noted that he did not want to take her away from her important legal work. Claudia looked at him seriously, assuring him that if he was truly intending to investigate the accident, they were both working for exactly the same goal. A short while later, Barnaby and Claudia stood out in the spacious backyard, looking over the manicured lawn. Barnaby recalled the details from the official police report, noting that according to the authorities, Mr. Beecher had come home, prepared a dish of food for the family dog, and brought it out to this exact spot. Claudia confirmed that she had seen the report as well, mentioning that the police had listed the horrific animal attack as entirely accidental. However, Barnaby observed that Claudia gave the distinct impression of believing it was something much more sinister than a mere accident. Claudia hesitated before explaining that all she could tell him was that the German Shepherd had been exceptionally well trained by Laura's first husband. She noted that Laura possessed a very special, commanding way with the animal. Furthermore, Claudia claimed that everyone in their social circle knew Laura was the precise kind of woman who always obtained exactly what she went after. Before Barnaby could question her further, a cold voice interrupted them from the patio. Laura Beecher stood there, her face pale but composed, asking Claudia what exactly she was telling the investigator. Claudia turned to face her, defiantly stating that she was only telling him the absolute truth. She pointed out that Joseph's untimely death had suddenly left Laura a very wealthy woman, a financial reality that would not have been possible had they gone through with the rumored divorce. Angry and insulted, Laura ordered Claudia to get out of her house immediately. Claudia accepted the demand with icy pleasure, turning to Barnaby to leave him with one final, haunting thought, stating that good watchdogs never attack unless they are explicitly ordered to do so. After Claudia departed, Laura walked out into the yard to greet the investigator, accompanied by a supportive gentleman. She asked Barnaby if he was indeed the man hired by the insurance firm. Barnaby introduced himself warmly as Barnaby Jones. The man beside Laura stepped forward and introduced himself as George Roswell, explaining that he and Laura's first husband, Ed, had served together in the Air Force. Barnaby greeted him politely. Laura sighed, expressing her frustration over Claudia's accusations, stating that she did not know what the lawyer had been telling him. She admitted that she and Joseph did have standard marital problems, but maintained that they were actively working them out and that there had been absolutely no official talk of a divorce. Barnaby, listening with a sympathetic ear, shared a bit of wisdom from his past, mentioning that an old preacher friend of his used to say that a good marriage was quite like picking huckleberries in the hot summertime, where the very best ones always seemed to be surrounded by the sharpest thorns. George nodded in agreement, asking what exactly they could do to assist Mr. Jones with his inquiry. Barnaby explained that there was a double indemnity accidental death clause embedded within Mr. Beecher's substantial life insurance policy. George noted that such a clause was fairly standard in the industry. Barnaby agreed, but clarified that the question they were facing was a highly technical one, focusing heavily on just how much and what specific kind of training the dog had received. George admitted he did not quite follow the logic. Barnaby simplified the matter, explaining that it all boiled down to whether the dog, Buck, had ever been given any formal, aggressive attack training. He stated that if the animal had been trained to attack, the insurance company would naturally contest paying out the double indemnity portion of the policy. Laura defended her family pet, stating that Colin's father had trained Buck solely to protect their family, and she did not believe he had ever trained the animal to be a vicious killer. George added that where one draws the line between protection and aggression was ultimately up to Barnaby and his company to decide. When Barnaby inquired if the dog had any prior history of biting or injuring people, Laura firmly stated that he had never done such a thing. Wishing to conclude the painful conversation, she asked if there were any further questions. Barnaby expressed that he had hoped to speak directly with her son, Colin. Laura informed him that the boy had not been seen since breakfast, but suspected he could be found exactly where he had spent the last 3 days, down at the local animal pound where the authorities were currently holding Buck. At the city animal shelter, the air was filled with the loud, echoing sound of dogs barking. Barnaby walked down the concrete corridor until he spotted a young boy sitting sadly outside one of the metal cages. Barnaby called out to Colin, who looked up with tear-rimmed eyes. Barnaby introduced himself and greeted the magnificent German shepherd resting inside the enclosure. Colin asked defensively if the Tam, too, had come to the shelter looking specifically for him. Barnaby explained that he was looking for both Colin and Buck, having been hired to look into the unfortunate accident involving his stepfather. Panic gripped the young boy, and he cried out, declaring that no one was going to kill his dog and that he would not let anybody hurt Buck. Barnaby spoke softly, reassuring the boy that whatever happened to Buck was ultimately in the hands of the legal authorities, not his. Colin insisted passionately that Buck would never hurt anybody unless he had a very good, defensive reason to do so. Barnaby carefully asked if Colin believed his stepfather might have been mistreating the animal behind closed doors. Colin nodded tearfully, stating that Buck was truly the only loyal friend he had left in the world. Before the conversation could deepen, an animal control officer walked down the aisle, informing Colin that his mother was on the telephone and wished to speak with him immediately. Barnaby encouraged the boy to go ahead and take the call, promising that Buck would still be right here waiting when he returned. Once Colin was out of earshot, the shelter officer turned to Barnaby with a heavy heart, admitting that he did not know how he was going to break the tragic news to the young boy. He revealed that an official order had come down from the city authorities about an hour ago. Barnaby asked with concern if the order was to destroy the dog. The officer nodded sadly, confirming that the execution was scheduled for noon tomorrow. He then asked Barnaby if he wanted to see something truly remarkable.